Warzone Season 1 has been out for a few weeks now, and in this video we're going to go over the best settings that you should be using inside Warzone. If you enjoy videos like this and you like to see weapon stat breakdowns, overall tips for Warzone, subscribe to our channel as we're trying to reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers very soon. A few things to keep in mind is that we play with controller on PC, so some of these settings might not be available on console. On top of that, we do skip over the keyboard and mouse settings as well. Getting straight into the settings for input device, you just want to make sure this is set to the correct device. If you're using controller, make sure it's set to controller. If you're using keyboard and mouse, make sure it's set to keyboard and mouse. The next setting is a really big one, which is field of view, and we have it set to 110. I feel like this is the perfect sweet spot to getting the maximum field of view possible without having any issues to your aim assist. I feel like when you go past 110, you start having problems with aim assist, but a really important setting is when you click on the advanced tab and make sure your ADS field of view is set to affected. This makes sure that when you're aimed down sight, you still get that 110 FOV and you can still see your surroundings even when you're aimed down sight. For brightness settings, I have it set to 60. I feel like this is a really good balance between having a good color range in your game and also being able to see in dark spots such as Superstore or any just dark buildings inside Warzone. I don't use any NVIDIA overlays or filters or anything like that on my game. I just like making sure I can see as best as possible when I'm just playing the game regularly and maximizing my frame rates. The next important setting I like to use is the Dertunopia, or whatever this is called, colorblind type. Now, even though I'm not colorblind, this just makes the game look a whole lot better in my opinion, especially with the color depth, and it helps you spot things in the distance that you might not usually spot. Another really big setting is the minimap shape. You want this to be set to square. It's something like 30% more you can see on the minimap than the circle shape. Plus, who wants a circle minimap anyway? It's just really weird. Minimap rotation, you want to be set to enabled. You want the minimap to follow you when you turn and move. For compass direction, you can have this set to letters or numbers. I prefer letters. I feel like it's just easier to say west or east to a teammate, for example, if you're playing a game, whereas shouting out numbers might be a bit confusing. The next settings are very important, especially if you're playing on PC. So for your graphic settings, you want to make sure your display is set to full screen, making sure you're not in a windowed mode, which is just going to make your game look weird, in my opinion anyway, unless you need it for some specific reason, but full screen is what you should be playing on. Then you want to make sure that your display adapter is set to your graphics card, especially if you do have one, of course. Display refresh rate will be just whatever the refresh rate of your screen is. If you're using a gaming monitor, it could be 144 Hz like I have here. It can go up, or if you're using a regular TV, it could be just 60 Hz. Render resolution is one that I play with quite a lot actually. I wouldn't go any lower than 1080p. Most displays now are 1080p, even if it's a regular TV, for example. But I like to play at 2573 by 1447, which is just over 2K resolution. Now, the reason why I have it set to this is because I can't have it specifically set to 2K for some weird reason in this game. Other than that, I just like to have the render resolution a little bit higher to make sure that my game can render in any sort of fine pixels, especially for enemies close by or just things I can't make out. So if you have a really good graphics card and your monitor is only 60 Hz, for example, I would recommend bumping this all the way up to 4K because it's still going to render your game and look very good. On top of that, you'll be able to see a lot of things that you wouldn't usually be able to see with this game. For aspect ratio, this is going to be set automatically. You can either have this set to automatic, for example, or I just have it set to 16:9. For Vsync, this is personal preference. I know a lot of people don't actually like Vsync, and you do get more frames by disabling Vsync, but I get a lot of screen tearing for some reason in this game, and that's why I have it enabled. For custom frame rate limit, you want to make sure you have this set because there's no reason for your graphics card to render more frames than you don't actually get. So after you've played a few games of Warzone and you know what your graphics card can render in terms of FPS, just select your custom frame rate limit to be a little bit above that, just to make sure you are getting all the frames you can. Then for the menu ones, you want to make sure those are both set to 60 or anything lower, just to make sure your game is not having to render much more frames in your settings, for example. These next two settings are just for NVIDIA graphics cards. For highlights, I have this set to disabled. I don't want this to be recording random games when I don't need it to. And also I have the low latency to enabled. I'm not exactly sure what enabled and boost does. It does state it on the side, but it still doesn't really make too much sense to me overall, so I just have it set to enabled. Display gamma, I have set to the standard setting. I've not really messed around with that too much. For texture resolution, I have this set to normal. I'm running a 3070 and this is not too bad. Sometimes I bump this down to low, which is the only two options I would recommend. Low helps you get more FPS out of your game, which is very important of course, especially when you're playing competitively. You can set this to very low if your hardware is not very good, but if you're playing Warzone, I'm assuming you've got decent enough hardware to run this game. For texture filter, I have this set to normal. Sometimes when I play around with this too much, it kind of makes my game look a bit weird. So I just have this set to normal and it looks fine for me. Particle quality I have set to low. If I bump this up, it will take more GPU power, so I don't want to use that much if I don't need it, especially for particles that only make the game look nicer. Bullet impacts I do need to be enabled to make sure you know if enemies have passed by a certain area. On top of that, I have tessellation set to near. Again, if I play around with this too much, it makes my game look a bit weird. If other settings work for you, that's great. On-demand texture streaming I have set to disabled. This uses your internet speeds, and that's why I have it set to disabled, because I don't want my game to render better textures and using my internet speeds, especially when I'm gaming and also streaming at the same time. Streaming quality I have set to normal. Again, this is down to your graphics card, and you can have this set to low, which if you don't have good enough hardware, you can have this set to low. I think normal works fine for me. Shadow map resolution I have set to normal as well. I wouldn't put this any lower than normal. The reason for that is you do want to have some detail in the shadows, especially if enemies are on a building above you, or you can see someone gliding in, you can just spot their shadow. You don't need super detailed shadows, you just need it to be good enough to make out enemies going by. Cache spot shadows I have disabled. Cache spot sun shadows I have disabled. That is a tongue twister. Particle lighting I have set to normal. Again, this is one of those things where it does make your game look nicer, but it's not actually going to give you any sort of competitive advantage. Ray tracing again is just going to make your game look a lot nicer, which you don't really need. Screen space reflection I have set to normal. I don't really play around with this too much, and it's because I do have my anti-aliasing set to filmic SMA 2x. Depth of field and the rest of these settings are very important and are available on console as well. You want to make sure depth of field is disabled. You do not want your game to blur backgrounds, especially when you're trying to pick out enemies at a distance. This is going to be very annoying. Filmic strength, you want to be set to 0. You don't want any film grain in your game. World motion blur, again, this is going to blur your game when you're moving around. You do not want that. Disable that. Weapon motion blur, again, disable that too. And film grain, you want to disable that too. These last few settings are going to make your game look a lot cleaner and just making sure that you're able to spot those enemies at a distance, even if you're playing on console. For controller settings, this is what I have on screen here. I use an Xbox Elite Series controller, so I do have paddles on the back of my controller. I only use 2 of them, and I'll explain how I use them in just a moment. Now, overall, for most players, the tactical button layout is going to be very easy to use. Even if you don't have a SCUF, an Elite Series controller, or even some of the Razer controllers do have buttons on the back now, you can still use this layout because it allows you to slide cancel with your right thumbstick, and it means that you don't need to take your thumbs off of the analog sticks, and you can still aim at targets and shoot. For stick layout, I have set to default. Invert look, a crazy person would have this set to anything else other than disabled. So like I said, have this set to disabled because that is the only setting you need. Dead zone for my controller is set to 0.08. Sometimes your controller can be less if it's new, for example, but this is where I stop getting stick drift. For my horizontal and vertical stick sensitivity, I have it set to 7. Sometimes I have this set to 6, it just depends on the kind of game I'm playing and overall how I'm feeling on the day. Again, with this low zoom multiplier, I have this set to 0.9. Sometimes I have this set to 0.85. I usually play around with those two settings. For high zoom, I have this set to 1 or 1.1, it just depends. But this means you're most likely going to be using a sniper rifle, and I like to have a bit more control, especially with the snappiness and how fast it is. With aim response curve, I have this set to dynamic. What this does is it actually allows you to be much snappier between the enemies. So let's say there's 2 enemies near you, and you want to snap from one to the other, it's going to be a lot quicker in transition. Now your aim will still slow down when you get close to a target because aim assist is still enabled. If you see any pro players snapping from one target to another very quickly with controller, it's because they're using the dynamic setting. Controller vibration I have set to disabled. I do not need vibrations to put me off my game or make me miss any shots. Aim assist I have set to standard. I feel like anything else is not that useful. I've tried using them all and it doesn't really help that much. Scale aim assist with FOV I have disabled as well. I feel like this is just going to make it a lot worse overall. Weapon mount activation I have set to ADS plus melee, which is the standard one. I haven't really changed this. Weapon mount movement exit I have set to enabled. Aim down sight behavior I have set to hold. Equipment behavior is hold as well. Use and reload behavior I have set to contextual tap. This is a really important setting. Depleted ammo weapon switch I have set to disabled because sometimes I feel like I don't want to switch weapons even if I've ran out of ammo. It's just kind of weird because let's say you're running away and you've ran out of ammo on your SMG. You still want to keep that out because it is your faster moving gun. This is a really important setting that a lot of players don't actually use, which is armor plate behavior. You want to make sure this is set to apply all. And what this will do is when you press the triangle or the Y button, it's going to apply all your armor plates providing you have them. Slide behavior is set to tap to make slide cancelling much easier because all you need to do is tap the button. Auto move forward definitely is disabled. Automatic sprint is disabled as well, and a lot of people like to use automatic tactical sprint. Vehicle camera recenter I have set to enable. This was the standard setting, I'm pretty sure. Auto parachute deploy I have set to disabled. You want to make sure that you only pull your chute when you get close to the ground. That way you can hit the ground much quicker than any other opponents and land and get loot faster. So that's it. That is the best settings for Warzone Season 1. If you enjoyed this video, definitely leave us a like as it helps us get recommended more. And also subscribe to the channel as we're trying to reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers. And if you want to see more, subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.